Between the unconscious and the stage, a veil is torn. On one side, the man who probed the shadows of the mind. On the other, the one who sang his pain to the world, unmasked, unafraid. Today, Freud listens to a piano shattering silence, and Freddie Mercury answers with a scream no theory ever dared to contain.
The first line already reveals everything. Mama just killed a man. The unconscious never lies, Mr. Mercury. What was killed here? A desire, a former self. The song begins like a confession, almost like surrendering on the analyst's couch.
Maybe I killed the boy who wanted to please everyone. Maybe it was just a metaphor or a distorted memory. Sometimes art says more than we know or less. The song wasn't made to be analyzed, Doctor. It was made to be felt.
To feel is what the unconscious allows us to do, but to understand is what sets us free. Your song, theatrical as it may be, has the structure of a dream. Fragmented, displaced, symbolic. There is guilt, punishment, and a desperate attempt to escape. I don't want to die. Sometimes wish I'd never been born at all. That is pure material for analysis.
So you're going to tell me that singing that is just a repetition of trauma? I prefer to think of it as liberation. This song saved my life before it was ever released. It pulled me out of the cage you call the superego. I sang what no one had the courage to say out loud.
Even the act of screaming can be a way to conceal the real silence. Sometimes, a confession is a performance meant to avoid facing the abyss. You sing with your chest wide open, but I wonder, what is it that sings inside you?
It sings what hurts, Doctor. It sings what I can't say in prose. I'm the channel. Sometimes I understand myself, sometimes I don't, and you can call it catharsis, projection, defense. I call it living. And living, Freud, is never clean. There's always blood in the rhyme.
I admire your surrender, but I won't deny that your song also carries the weight of duality. There's a boy begging for forgiveness, and a man defying the heavens. What happens when those two look at each other in the mirror?
They face each other every day in the dressing room. One wipes the other's sweat, one screams and the other sings. I am both, and maybe a few more I haven't met yet.
Interesting. The death you sing about may not be someone else's, but of a version of yourself that no longer fits. Symbolic death is sometimes the birth of the true subject. You sang a funeral, but whose wake was it?
Maybe it was mine. Maybe I die in every song. Maybe I live there more than anywhere else. The audience resurrects me every time they sing along. And you know, Doctor, not every death is an ending. Sometimes it's just the beginning of the opera. Doctor, you see everything as structure, layers, mechanisms. I get it, it's your craft. But what if music isn't a construction, but a collapse? What if what you call material for analysis is simply the implosion of everything I tried to hide? I didn't write Bohemian Rhapsody thinking of a diagnosis. I wrote it like someone drowning, trying to leave a note on the surface. When I sang, "I'm just a poor boy, nobody loves me," that wasn't a character, that was me. That was the boy who grew up wondering whether he deserved to be loved without even knowing why.
Pain that isn't symbolized tends to repeat. You did symbolize it in verses, falsettos, rhythmic breaks. That I acknowledge. But I still hear a cry that found no echo. A boy who, standing before the mirror, didn't know whether he saw a monster or a martyr. You said the audience resurrects you. But I ask, what happens when the curtain falls?
When the curtain falls, all that's left is exhaustion. The makeup runs, and the echo becomes emptiness. But that's where my truth lives too. I'd lie back on the couch, in the dark, not knowing if I had been enough, if singing was enough to keep me from disappearing. And still I'd go back. The next day I'd go back. Because singing was the only place where I didn't have to pretend. I don't sing to please, I sing to survive.
Interesting. What you call survival is, in many cases, the most sophisticated form of defense. A displacement. You displace your pain into aesthetics, like hiding a scream inside a symphony. But the suffering is still there, isn't it?
Of course it is. I never said it didn't hurt. I only said I learned how to transform it. The stage is my lab, the microphone my confessional, and every note that reaches someone is like a part of me stops rotting inside. I don't want to be analyzed, doctor. I want to be heard. Would you dissect a Van Gogh painting just to prove he was sick? Maybe he was, but that matters less than what he left behind.
Art always escapes us, yes, but I still believe that by interpreting it, we don't diminish it. On the contrary, we give it shape. You said you wrote as someone drowning. Well, I try to throw ropes to those in that abyss, even if sometimes they don't reach.
You know, doctor, sometimes the abyss is the only thing that listens without judgment. We learn to speak to it. We even learn to rhyme with it. Every time I stepped onto a stage, I brought with me ghosts, guilt, hidden loves, and fears that didn't even have names. Music was the only language they understood. You may call it defense. I call it ritual.
Ritual, a word that carries collective memory. Interesting. Maybe you were, without realizing it, a priest of modern pain, a medium between suffering and beauty. But tell me, do you believe you healed by singing?
Healed? No, doctor. Art doesn't heal, but it keeps the pain from taking over everything. It's like dancing on the edge of a volcano. It might still erupt, but at least there's music while you wait. I didn't want healing. I wanted meaning. And when people cried in the audience, even without knowing what I was saying, that's what kept me standing, knowing I wasn't alone anymore.
There is something in your music that unsettles me. An absence. At no point, even when facing death, do you appeal to God. Not for forgiveness, not for comfort. That's significant. Most men, when they reach their limit, seek some divine presence. But you don't. Beelzebub has a devil put aside for me. There is hell, but no heaven.
Do you know why, doctor? Because sometimes God is more absent than the audience after the encore. I grew up surrounded by dogmas, by promises of heaven and threats of punishment. But I never saw those promises stop anyone from suffering. When I wrote that part, I had already understood that the real hell is not a place. It's the feeling of being alone while everyone's screaming your name. And if there is a God, maybe he doesn't care about songs or sins. Maybe he only listens to those who sing with their soul laid bare.
So you chose to sing instead of pray. And perhaps for many it was a form of prayer. But when you end with "nothing really matters to me," it doesn't sound like liberation. It sounds like nihilism, as if life has lost all weight. Aren't you afraid of that emptiness?
I'm not afraid of the emptiness, doctor. I speak with it. Sometimes it answers. Sometimes it silences me. But it was that void that taught me to create. I'm not a nihilist. I'm a survivor. Saying nothing matters is not giving up. It's freedom from all that chains us. It's a dance with impermanence. When everything matters too much, the weight drags us down. When nothing matters, we're free to fly or to fall. I accepted that, have you?
Most men run from that thought. We live as if meaning were mandatory, as if life always needed a why. But there's something in your surrender that fascinates me. Your acceptance of chaos, of not knowing. Perhaps that is freedom.
Freedom, doctor, isn't doing what you want. It's being who you are, even when that displeases everyone. I walked on stage without knowing if I'd be accepted. I wore clothes that mocked conventions. I said things that hurt or confused. But every time I did that, I freed myself a little more from fear. And fear, Freud, is the true tyrant. It's not repression that kills us. It's the fear of being who we really are.
Fear. We always return to it. It's the root of many neuroses. But what intrigues me is that you seem to have turned it into fuel. Most people turn it into a prison. What was the cost of that?
The cost was high. Loneliness, misunderstanding, nights that were far too long, people loving me for what I represented, but without the courage to touch who I really was. Fame amplifies everything, including the abyss. But you know what saved me? The stage. There, I didn't need permission. I didn't need to ask forgiveness for existing. It was as if the universe opened a breach and said, "Go, Freddie. Sing what no one dares to say." And so I did.
Shared pain becomes symbol, and symbols heal. Perhaps you were, unknowingly, a modern healer. Your altar was the stage, your instrument, your own soul. I'm not saying suffering disappears, but when it finds a form, it stops being invisible.
And that's what most people forget, Doctor. Sometimes art is just a beautiful way of saying, I bleed too. And when someone hears that and says, me too, the wound becomes a bridge. I don't need salvation, I need truth. And if that bothers people, maybe it's because there's still a lot inside them that needs to wake up.
One thing that intrigues me is the duality between the performer on stage and the man off it. The persona that dazzles versus the person who suffers. Don't you think that by creating such an extravagant mask, you also built a golden prison? A character so powerful that even you risk disappearing behind it.
Of course I did. And at times I wanted that mask to swallow me whole. Just to be stage Freddie, the storm, the star, the myth. Because being just Farrokh, that hurt. But the truth is, every mask is born from a wound. The difference is, I painted mine with glitter. I didn't wear the mask to hide, I wore it to scream. I used it to say what the shy boy from Zanzibar couldn't, and maybe that's what people feel when they see me, a soul that wasn't afraid to become a mirror.
So you see the mask not as falsehood, but as a tool. That's sophisticated. But even tools have a cost. The gaze of the other, for example, that audience applauding you. Did you feel seen or consumed?
Most of the time, consumed. People wanted energy, spectacle, transgression. They wanted to see someone live what they didn't have the courage to, and I gave it to them, because I needed it too. But when the show ended, all that remained was silence, a kind of silence that even a crowd can't fill. There were nights I looked in the mirror and thought, am I still me, or just what they expect me to be? The stage is liberating, Freud, but the dressing room can be a cell.
You describe a cycle of exposure and isolation, a pendulum between collective ecstasy and private emptiness. That's common among artists, but in your case, there seems to be a sharp awareness of it. How did you cope with the expectation of always being an extreme version of yourself?
I pretended it was fun, and sometimes it was, but other times it was exhausting. I knew the world wanted the incendiary, exaggerated, almost mythic Freddie. But what no one saw was that behind all that, there was a man just hoping someone would look at him without applause, just with truth. Fame is a magnifying glass. It enlarges beauty, but also loneliness. And I didn't want to die just as a symbol. I wanted to be understood, even if only by a few eyes.
This loneliness you speak of may be the cost of individuation, the process of becoming who one truly is, even if it means disappointing the world. Jung, my former disciple, spoke much of that. And in your case, it's curious. The more you showed yourself, the more invisible your essence seemed to become.
Exactly. People saw the light, but not what fed it. I was a star, but also a man in pieces. I exposed myself so much they forgot there was still flesh, fear, exhaustion. Being an artist often means giving until there's almost nothing left. But look, I'm not complaining. I chose this. I'd rather die being too much than live being a ghost.
You turned wounds into spectacle, and loneliness into symbol. And without even intending to, you touched what analysis has tried to reach for decades, the true self. Not as an immutable essence, but as the courageous gesture of reinventing oneself, even if it costs everything.
I don't know if I was truthful, Doctor, but I know I was whole, and if the masks I wore shone too brightly, it's because the darkness inside was just as vast. I just tried to light the way, even if it was my final show. Doctor, tell me honestly, when someone like me sings a song like Bohemian Rhapsody, with so much pain, so much drama, so much excess, do you think that's healing? Do you think I was treating myself, revealing myself, or just hiding behind a rock opera? I still wonder, was I a scream or a cry for help that no one understood?
I don't think you were searching for healing. You were searching for meaning. And when that failed, you searched for impact. And when even that wasn't enough, you looked for a space where pain could be beautiful enough that people wouldn't be afraid of it. You sculpted suffering into sound. That, in itself, is a form of eternity.
I always knew I wouldn't last long. A flame that burns bright dies quickly, isn't that what they say? But I didn't want to last. I wanted to leave a mark. I wanted my voice to keep blowing across the wounds of those who'd come after. And maybe, just maybe, some lonely kid in a dark room will hear my music and feel like they're not completely lost.
That is a legacy. Not the fame, not the records, not the trophies, but the power to touch someone in places even analysis can't reach. You gave form to human pain, without manuals, without interpretations, just with courage. And that, Mr. Mercury, is something even the gods might envy.
Sometimes I wonder how many versions of me were left along the way. How many pieces I left in each chorus, each verse. Maybe I broke myself so others could feel whole. I don't know if that's sacrifice or pure ego, but I know it was necessary.
Maybe it's both. Maybe every creative soul floats between altruism and narcissism, between offering and pleading. But in your case, there's something more. There's honesty. Even with all the masks, you were honest in what you sang. And that's what remains.
And you, Doctor, after everything you've heard, after everything you've dissected, do you still believe we're all just sick people trying to heal? Or deep down, are we simply human beings trying to leave something beautiful before it's all over?
I think we are both. We are chaos trying to make music. We are trauma trying to become poetry. And if we manage, even for a moment, to help someone see themselves in that, then maybe, just maybe, it was worth having lived.
Anyway, the wind blows